Goblin Slayer is just a D&D game, and I'm gonna explain how it went down. Okay, first off, the Game Master wanted to do a serious and difficult adventure, so the players can feel extra rewarded as they level up. They start with the idea that 3 of them had already teamed up, and had Priest Girl being separate from them because of their detailed backstories. The GM starts the story with the Priest Girl coming into the guild that they were already a part of, so they ask her to join them. Unfortunately, one of the players couldn't get out of previous plans for the week, and didn't make it to that game session, so they picked a typical goblin slaying quest to start out, figuring they can do a short dungeon crawl before getting into the main story. The GM had an extensive plan of having the players kill a demon's cult and saving the world. Unfortunately, they do not proceed very far into the cave when they are overrun and several of the players are taken down. Being more role-playing focused players and not as experienced in combat, they are surprised at the extreme difficulty in this level 1 dungeon. To prove he is running a serious and dark game, the GM explains how the goblins abuse their victims before they kill them by having the goblins rape and capture one of the female characters, played by the GM's best friend, who I'm going to call Larry. The GM didn't feel as comfortable having that exactly happen to the other female character, who was actually played by a woman, so she only got poisoned and got some of her clothes ripped off by the goblins. Priest Girl manages to barely survive, but with many goblins chasing her, her entire party knocked down, and no spells left, it looks like a total party kill in the first game. They end the session before the Priest Girl is killed, and decide to see what will happen before they decide to start over completely. After the game, the players talk. Priest Girl's player, I'm gonna call her Lisa, is dating the last party member that couldn't make it. I'm gonna call him John. She and the others explained what happened in the game to John, and Lisa was sad she would probably have to make a new character after she already got so attached to her innocent Priest Girl. So John came up with a character idea and talks to the GM about it. The next game, they come back to the Priest Girl's perilous situation, but this time she is supported by the new party member, Goblin Slayer. John came up with this character and his backstory of only wanting to kill goblins after he heard how awful the GM made them. Because of this very specific character, the GM allowed him to suddenly show up in the dungeon. The girl who played the poison wizard decided she wanted to make a new character, especially because she didn't stat herself very well, so John felt his character would mercifully kill her after the GM gave the description that she was just too far gone. Through some lucky rolls, and because John was the most experienced player in the group, they clear out the goblin horde and make it to rescue the girl, played by Larry, in case you forgot. Despite most of the players not doing anything this session, they are impressed by the role-playing between Goblin Slayer and Priest Girl. Although Lisa got really into role-playing her innocent character and cried over John killing the goblin children before realizing that was a little overdramatic. In the third session, Larry decided to retire his character because he didn't want to play a traumatized woman. He made a new one with the other 2 players. The player who is the basic warrior guy got killed right away and was just forced to watch the entire second session. While they made new characters, Priest Girl rejoined Goblin Slayer on the next mission. The GM expected them to fight the goblins for a while as it was a massive mapped out area, and then the new party members could arrive in time that they needed help. But John decided Goblin Slayer would be very cautious, to explain why he wasn't a super good fighter despite being silver ranked guild member. His character was only level 1. Once the GM explained the area, John quickly came up with a plan and had Lisa use the shield ability to cheese the entire area with fire arrows. The GM is disappointed he couldn't use his map, but gives them credit for coming up with such a good plan. He spends the rest of the session doing world building and role playing with them, reveals Goblin Slayer has a childhood friend, and gives him the opportunity to explain some of his backstory. He made this all happen as a flashback before they got the bounty, because he knew if he let them go back to the guild, Goblin Slayer would just go straight to the bounty board and find the next group of goblins to kill. The other players were finally finished up with their characters, and the GM set them up to meet with Goblin Slayer for a mission. The girl who had played the wizard, calling her Cindy, stuttered over her words so badly at one point that she accidentally called Goblin Slayer something that sounded like Orkbolg, and everyone thought it was so funny she decided that was the Elvish way to pronounce it and just kept saying it. Larry, wanting to call Goblin Slayer something goofy too, but also not being super clever, decided his dwarf would call him Beard Cutter. No one really understood why and didn't question him on it either. Lisa had to leave early at the end of this session, so the GM had Priest Girl talking to other adventurers while the new players met Goblin Slayer. They asked him to help with a story mission which they came up with for their backstories, and planning it with the GM for the overarching story of defeating the Demon Lord's cult. John, being a hardcore role player, initially refuses the job, but the GM clarifies that this first mission involves killing goblins, so he agrees. Lisa was disappointed she was left out of this part, but she joins seconds before they head out and the entire party is together. They practice role-playing and have the scene where they eat around a fire and get drunk, but Goblin Slayer stays alert and stoic. Cindy was already kind of annoyed at Goblin Slayer for not wanting to join their mission, and she berates him for acting so aloof when everyone else is enjoying themselves, but John takes his character very seriously. After the long bout of role-playing, they fast forward to the ruins where the goblins are. Cindy made a much better statted character this time, focused on being an elf archer, so she gets a critical and manages to kill both goblins guarding the ruins with one arrow. She kills the guard dog right after. Goblin Slayer immediately freaks everyone out by cutting open the goblins and covering elf archer and priest girl with blood to mask the smell. Cindy freaks out over the thought of it, but Lisa rolls with it. Although he stayed in character, everyone could tell John was partially doing this just to get back at Cindy for being annoyed at him earlier. The GM gives the lore of the area as they venture into the ruins, and then elf archer and the dwarf get good perception rolls, so Cindy finds a trap while Larry figures out which way the goblins are. Everyone is playing super cautious because of how quickly they died last time. They decide to explore the opposite direction of where the goblins are, and they find a hostage. The woman is chained to the wall and has been injured and abused. Priest Girl is worried Goblin Slayer will kill her as he killed Cindy's last character, and John seemed to be very dedicated to his role-playing, but he simply kills the goblin and lets Richard, previously the warrior, who is now a lizard man, use one of his abilities to bring the woman to safety. The GM was going to have some other way to get her to safety, so the players wouldn't have to worry about it, but Richard hadn't done much for these games, so he let him do something. Cindy's elf girl and Lisa's priest have a roleplay moment, with elf girl breaking down, seeing the tragic scene, while John has Goblin Slayer search the room and finds a map. But it just says what they already figured out from their perception checks. They know for sure where the goblins are. They journeyed forward and kill some more goblins, then they plan out what to do for the final area. John was getting kind of sick of Cindy roleplaying her character as having a mental breakdown, so he tells the elf archer she can leave if she's not up for it, and they can make do without her. She gets annoyed at him, but the other characters encourage her, so she steels herself for the task and continues. They find themselves looking over a big arena with a bunch of goblins sleeping within it. John has Larry and Lisa combine their spells to make all the goblins fall deep asleep because he is a major metagamer. Then the rest of the party goes through and kills them one by one. They finish the task, and the dwarf and priestess rejoin the group, just as they hear a new enemy entering the area. The party encounters the boss of the area, an ogre. Goblin Slayer initially doesn't care to fight him because he isn't a goblin, but the DM won't let John talk his way out of this boss encounter, which should start them on the path to slaying the Demon King's army. The ogre throws a huge AoE fireball attack, and priestess uses her last spell to save them from it. The fight begins and everyone goes all out with their best abilities. Lizard Man makes his Dragon Tooth warrior, and dwarf starts to use his spell, but it takes an extra turn to fully cast, so elf archer distracts the boss. It seems to go pretty well, but on the ogre's next turn, after Goblin Slayer gets one attack in, he nearly kills Goblin Slayer in one hit. The party is now very worried, seeing how powerful this boss is. Priestess gives Goblin Slayer some potions on her turn, and he says he can kill the boss in one shot, and they all say do it. He used a gate scroll that he linked to the bottom of the sea. The GM let him do this without realizing why he wanted it. John explained the pressure in the bottom of the sea is so strong it would cut the ogre into pieces. Everyone is amazed at John's ingenuity for using a scroll that is normally a way to escape a fight. The GM fudges some numbers together to have the ogre still alive, but with no limbs, hoping the group might question him to lead into their next quest to kill the Demon Lord's army. But everyone just lets Goblin Slayer finish him off as he delivers an epic line, "Goblins are much more troublesome than you." Everyone cheers and the game ends as they travel back to town. Wanting to help the GM get on the main mission and feeling it would work for her character, Cindy decides that Elf Archer wants to take Goblin Slayer on a proper adventure after they suffer through the horrible goblin horde. In the next session, they level up and have some roleplay moments, but mostly it is a shopping day. The GM gives more backstory on Goblin Slayer, explaining he lives with a childhood friend and explaining how he checks for goblins every day. The other party members unsuccessfully try to get John to go on a different kind of adventure with them, but with everyone having a deep hatred for goblins at this point, and John's dedication to his character becoming everyone's favorite part of the adventure, the GM decides to go all in on the goblin storyline, although adding some other aspects to keep everyone interested. He sets up the next mission with a request specifically for Goblin Slayer. Next session, the Adventurers Guild gets the news that heroes have slain the Demon Lord's cult, cementing that the story will now focus on goblin slaying instead of the original idea of being heroes. Goblin Slayer forces the others to go on a mission in his Goblin Slayer way, although the rest of the party is good with it as everyone still really likes John's blunt character now that they are used to it. Cindy promises they'll go on a real adventure after slaying goblins. Elf Archer and Priestess make Goblin Slayer promise not to kill the goblins with fire, poison, or waterboarding, and he agrees with their demands to their surprise. John knows he needs to be a little more friendly with everyone as the games go on. They travel to Watertown and head to the temple where they are to meet the Archbishop of the Supreme God. The GM gives some lore about how the Archbishop was known as the Sword Maiden and how she was part of the adventuring group that killed the Demon Lord 10 years ago. Lisa plays all nervous to meet her, while Goblin Slayer focuses on the mission and only wants to slay goblins, which is now everyone's favorite joke in the game. The Sword Maiden tells them that there have been people attacked and children kidnapped. Also, one adventurer killed a goblin in the streets. They figure that the goblins are underground, and the GM confirms it through the Archbishop. The players ask more questions about why they were called for the mission when there are guards and other adventurers in the city. The GM scrambles some answers together for them. No one really takes the goblins seriously. They eventually finish talking to the NPC and head into the ruins beneath the city. They immediately find a large group of goblins, and with them all being level 2 now, they slaughter them pretty easily. They travel through the huge dungeon that the GM prepared, and they find an underground river. After more perception checks, a huge boat filled with goblins rushes them. Lisa uses protection, and they consider how to deal with this situation as Priestess shields them from arrows. Eventually, they just wait until the boat gets close enough to jump on the boat, because no one really likes Goblin Slayer's crazy ideas. They do pretty well in the fight, but the GM put a ton of goblins on the boat. Eventually, Larry decides to use a new ability, and it works a little too well, completely destroying the boat. Luckily, John and Richard get their athletics check to be able to easily jump off before they get thrown in the river. The players yell at Larry to just do that first next time, but he had only one use and didn't know what it did, despite all the rules being written down right in front of him. While they debate to either rest here to restore their stats or keep going so they don't get ambushed, a crocodile appears and eats the drowning goblins. They all run away from it as it chases them. Lisa and Larry fail their checks, so Goblin Slayer carries Priestess while Lizard Man carries the dwarf. Cindy gets a good perception check and hears more boats full of goblins coming. Lisa casts Holy Light on the crocodile's tail and leads the goblins to the monster as they run through a side passage, then turn around to watch the chaos. The GM smiles as the encounter actually went almost exactly as planned for once, with the party creatively using the crocodile to defeat the large number of goblins. With that area finished, the GM explains that Goblin Slayer knows the goblins were not there naturally, but someone had set them there because they knew how to pilot the boats, which they wouldn't have known otherwise. They go back to the city to rest and recoup before continuing the large dungeon. The next session, each person rests in their own way while John ultra prepares for the adventure by asking for a canary in case of any poison gas and getting a ton of supplies. John had played a lot of adventures with this GM and knew the kind of traps he liked. They proceed with their goal to find the leader of the goblins first. The GM explains some of the lore of the area, and when everyone complains the map layout is so confusing, he gives the explanation that it was purposefully made confusing so monsters wouldn't disturb the tombs of the warriors in the area. Or whatever. No one really buys the explanation. Everyone knows this GM just likes really huge and overly complicated dungeons. They walk into a room with another captured woman chained up, but as they approach her, they find it's just a skeleton as the door shuts behind them and they are trapped. The canary starts to freak out as poison gas enters the chambers. John uses the supplies he got earlier to protect them from the gas as they all fail their perception checks to find a way out. As the gas dissipates, they hear the goblins outside the door. They barricade it and prepare for the coming onslaught. Goblins start to break through, but then the door gets completely destroyed. A large goblin champion bursts through. They do pretty well against the smaller enemies, but the goblin champion blocks Goblin Slayer's attacks and gets a critical on John, which nearly kills him in one hit. With things looking bad, Priestess fails a terror check and loses her spell because of it, and the goblins push through. With Priestess in shock, she gets picked up by the goblin champion as it starts to eat her. Everyone was really enjoying their characters and the adventure, so they are really worried about getting another TP APK. The GM has a little too much fun frightening the players with how the goblins rip the clothes off of Elf and explaining the horror that Priestess is experiencing. On John's next turn, he activates a Berserker ability to push through bleeding out and manages to get some really good rolls to choke out the Goblin Champion with the hair from the prisoner dummy. The GM wonders if hair is strong enough to kill a monster, and John explains assassins used hair as a killing tool and that it's actually extremely strong bunched together. He buys the explanation and allows Goblin Slayer to injure him enough that the goblins all run away. They patch up Priestess, but John runs out of the extra HP from his Berserker ability, and he's still bleeding out. Without any more healing items, and Priestess not having any more spells for the day, Goblin Slayer dies. Everyone is very emotional, hyped from the epic finish, but they are really sad that he'll have to make a new character. But with how the game had been going, and because the GM didn't want to remake another campaign after scrapping the last one, he says not to throw out the character sheet just yet, and the session ends. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video and let me know in the comments if you want part 2. I'm Wheeze. Check out Goblin Slayer Explained Badly for a similar styled video. It'll be here on the end screen. Hope you enjoyed this one. Ja meow.